This is the Raw and Radical Women in the Arts podcast, and I am your host, Maureen Broadbeck.
Raw, unprocessed.
In each episode, we explore the mechanisms of identity, vulnerability, authenticity, empowerment, and social change through conversations with inspiring women who are making history and challenging the status quo in both the art world and in society.
Radical rebel. Progressive.
We talk about their real-life challenges and celebrate cis and transgender women so that you can be inspired, empowered, take action, and further your critical understanding about what it means to be a woman in the arts.
Woman feminism. A revolutionary catalyzing reformation. Radical.
Welcome to Raw and Radical Women in the Arts. Today, our guest is Olivia Fahmy. Olivia is an art historian, curator, and author. She is specialized in contemporary art and especially photography, and is the author of several texts published in scientific catalogs, specialized art magazines, and exhibition catalogs. She was the curator of exhibition and assistant to the collection of the Musée d'Art de Puy, and then she was responsible for publishings at the Centre de la Photographie Genève, the Center for Photography in Geneva. In 2015, she co-founded the independent art space Tunnel, where she pursued curatorial projects. Olivia holds a Master of Arts in Art History and a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science and Art History from the Universities of Lausanne and Bern in Switzerland. She is currently doing a postgraduate specialization in postcolonial studies at Goldsmiths College, University of London. And last but not least, she is the curator of the collection of contemporary art and diaspora art at the Fondation Gandur for the Arts in Geneva. Please welcome Olivia. Hi, Olivia.
Hi, Maureen.
Welcome. Welcome to my studio.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm so happy that you were able to come and that we can actually record this episode here. This is great. Tell us, what got you interested in studying art history, and how did you get started in your career in the arts?
All right, so I wanted to begin by quoting a woman artist, maybe. The French author Leila Slimani would speak about that quite well in her essay entitled Le Parfum des Fleurs la Nuit, that she wrote while being invited to stay for a night in the museum of the Punta della Dogana in Venice, where she was actually sleeping in the middle of the Pinot collection. And she would say that she felt impressed and quite uncomfortable just being in a museum, not knowing the codes, and feeling a lack of freedom of mind and of critical spirit. And I think I can relate to this for when I was younger, at least.
Yeah.
So I grew up in a family that was quite modest, economically speaking, and that was not really sensitive to culture, to fine arts, to films, and to museums. And so my first contact with culture, I guess, was with pop culture.
Nice.
But then, that's a beginning, right?
Yeah.
But museums were not spaces that we felt we belonged to, I guess. And that was not something we were doing for weekends, or we were not visiting museums on a regular basis and so on. I realize now that this is quite unusual sometimes in our field. And my feeling was kind of mixed when I began to study history of art. I guess I had an interest, but still didn't have parents that encouraged to be curious about museums and art and so on. So at the beginning, just working in the museum was something that it took some time for me to feel legitimate in doing.
Yeah.
And that's also why, besides research and curatorial work, I've always been very interested and invested in question of education around the arts, and that remains very central to me. But anyhow, even though I grew up in Switzerland, and this is my background on this side, I also had the chance to spend time in Egypt, being Egyptian. And there is a really strong sense of the question of heritage.
Yes.
Probably because it is visible everywhere, in
yes.
every cities, and of course. So my family comes from Cairo. They live in Cairo. So in Cairo you have the pyramids, of course. So this is already a strong icon, so to say. But then, along the Nile, or when you go south in the country, you also see many temples, monuments, and everything. And I remember also my father telling the story of probably in the 1980s, when there was not much security around the archaeological sites, that him and his friend climb on the pyramids at night and so on. So I don't know if it's a legend, but
cool.
he kept telling the story because I liked it, probably. But anyhow, there is this sense of appropriating one's heritage, which is very strong. So yeah, I guess my interests came from there, or my sensitivity. And Cairo Museum was also a thing to me. So I guess I was familiar with this place. It felt like something I belonged to more than actually museums, like institutions in Europe.
Yeah.
And now that I work with a contemporary African art collection, and there is also all these questions about institutions in Africa or in Europe or in the US related to this label of African contemporary art, I think the Cairo Museum went in my mind again and again. I could relate to this experience. Yeah.
This is super interesting, and I think it's very interesting you mentioned the idea of legitimacy, because legitimacy from a background of where you come from, but then there's also this entire legitimacy being a woman in the arts and finding your place. And this is something I hear a lot, and it usually takes a long time for women to really feel legitimate in their position.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So why curating?
While studying history of art, I was with a group of people very interested also in trying experiments.
Yeah.
No artist of our times. Yeah, and try to be in contact with a scene. So trying to be engaged really with art that was being made while we were studying, and being able to relate to history of art as a history in itself, like part of the history, but also having this contact with more contemporary practices. I began by working in the Musée d'Art de Puy, and that was the first professional experience. And then very quickly after that, Tunnel, which was one of the first like more experimental projects began. And this has been an ongoing project for 7 years now.
Yeah, because this was in 2015. You co-founded the space, which is an independent art space with 3 other artists. Tell us about this experience of really collaborating and collaboration and co-creation.
Right. So now we are 6. It's really collective, and we engage a lot with each other. We co-program, but we also have many different discussions. And since last year, we also really have kind of group projects, because we were invited for the first Jardin d'hiver at the Musée cantonal des Beaux-Arts on the invitation of Gilles Gasparina. So this exhibition, which will happen every 2 years, I think, and which's purpose is to show a bit the local scene. And we took this opportunity to talk more with each other, to make a publication together about our thoughts on public collections, because this is the thing with having this new incredible tool, right, of the Musée cantonal des Beaux-Arts in Lausanne. So more and more really collective projects beside the co-programming. And this idea of trying to have a space as open as possible and as flexible as possible for the artists we invite. And also we tried to make many connections with different practices, people that didn't know each other, artists that didn't know each other before working together, to try to create, because we had an intuition or something, to try to create a conversation between them, or to see if they have things to actually speak about together or works to produce together and so on. So this was a bit the thing with Tunnel.
Really cool. So how do you think curating exhibition is contributing to changes in society?
Well, I think it's like when you see a good film, when you have an interesting, a nice visual experience or sound experience also, or olfactive experience is also now part of the thing. Probably you can relate to the world and to yourself maybe more accurately, or you can keep looking for whatever you're looking for. We're all very different people. Hopefully more and more diversity will be part of the conversation in these different cultural institutions. This is also the big deal with the educational program. But so I guess the change is really in the way seeing a good exhibition with a purpose you can relate to can be something that changes you as well. So
Yeah.
If this happens, this is the best. This is the best output you can have, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Life-changing moments.
Yeah.
Even if it's tiny, it still does something. So let's talk about the different experiences you had as a curator. What were or are the greatest challenge in the different positions and different jobs you did? What were the greatest challenge for you as a woman?
Interesting that you say as a woman in the end. I think caring is a great challenge. Like caring in a relevant way about the people you invite, the time you take, the way you focus your attention on the things that matter for the artist, but also in generous around the topic you want to approach. So yeah, taking this time and caring in a relevant way are two things that I think are challenging, actually, because of course we all have many different projects going on at the same time sometimes also. So it's kind of putting the focus on the things that matter, and I think caring is an important point. And probably it's also a point very much related to the way women would be educated. But I think it's a good thing. And probably the more we also give value to the question of care in our institutions, the more the public can feel it. Yeah. People around will be working in the same direction so that it's the best possible experience for everyone. Yeah,
I think this is such an important word, actually, and we don't speak about it enough. Caring is also being in the present, in the moment. And we tend in our society to be distracted by so many things and having to do so many things at the same time, that really is taking this time to really be with somebody, to really listen to somebody is so important. And it really brings some authenticity to relationships and to everything, really. So this is really important. You mentioned that. Thanks for that. Do you think as a woman you had different or more challenges in your career?
I think, good question. I would like quite automatically say yes without really thinking, but I'm going to try to put argument in there. No, I think we're facing probably for this decade, but it can last for a bit longer. Unfortunately, I can imagine, but still, there is a discrepancy probably in the way we actually legitimately ask institutions and art spaces and people involved in the field to be more inclusive and more caring as well. Yeah. This is very legitimate. On the other hand, we are now living in a society where everyone that participates in this educational system is not necessarily sensitized to these questions, right? So equality is not something that educators, school teachers, and so on are not really educated themselves about or around. So we'll be facing this discrepancy of, on the one hand, having this lack of education around equality questions. I imagine as a mother, you also face that a lot with having children, even though we're in Switzerland, right? Yeah. I can imagine not separating boys and girls for activities in kindergarten already is not something that is done everywhere all the time. And this should be very systematic, that you offer the same possibilities for kids since the very beginning. Yeah. So this is not really done yet. And on the other hand, we want to be more and more inclusive. And we ask institutions to be so, but maybe without necessary means or resources that it takes and the time that it takes. So it's challenging. On my side as a curator, it's challenging to try to fill this gap somehow. And as a woman, I also feel it in the way probably I think I haven't been offered the same possibilities as men until now. It can be a day-to-day thing. It's also in terms of possibilities, of the way you feel legitimate or not, once again, which is very much related to education, as we were saying before. And I also feel very privileged to be able to do my work, to have a voice. It's not necessarily always easy to have this voice, to take this opportunity, to take this space. So still, I feel this discrepancy, Yeah,
this is interesting. I feel like as a parent, we are witnessing the foundations of this gender and separateness in society. Mm-hmm. On one hand, you can see parents that are very eager to separate it, and some parents that are very eager not to separate it. And then you have the child that either are in between and there's a real fluidity between one and the other. And this is really interesting because those children, they're going to grow up and they already have their way to be and their belief. And they're going to make the society of the future. So it's really interesting to witness this as a parent and to try to act, in it, in what's your contribution in that, and how do you make, through your education, a more equal, a more caring world.
Absolutely. And probably in this conversation, I'm also very much interested in the intersectionality we can speak about, because, of course, we're just mentioning gender discrepancies now. But in terms of race, class, all types of discriminations, there is a conversation now, which is already something. There is more and more consciousness around these issues. But still, if we think about one, then we have to think about all the type of discriminations we're facing. So
yeah, for sure. Could you talk about your work at the Fondation Gandur pour l'Art, which is the Gandur Foundation for the Arts in Geneva, and what made them decide to create the collection of contemporary African and diaspora art?
How did it begin? So I think it began with out of curiosity and also out of an interest towards visual languages and probably also political questions or society questions that these artists would bring in the conversation in contemporary art. Now, before saying anything, I have to maybe emphasize that there is something useful about calling it contemporary African art and art of the artist of the African diaspora. Once this is said, using this label is also quite restrictive, considering that we talk about a continent with 54 different countries and hundreds and thousands of different cities and areas and cultures. And we also, with this collection, we don't really separate Northern Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, which is also something, because other collection would maybe sometime separate the continent in two. So that's not something we do with this collection. But still, it's suddenly saying Africa evokes an imaginary that is important to emphasize, that we evoke this imaginary and that we have to dismantle a bit and to question a bit what we are talking about. So this, and also it's quite restrictive because many of the artists in the collection are raising questions around identity issues and are trying to actually open up a bit the way you can envisage identity. So it's restrictive, at least for these 2 points. And maybe the third one is that talking about Africa is also very much related to a vision of how we describe the world and geography. And in this sense, like philosophically maybe, Africa is a Western invention. So so this is these are the type of contradictions I'm dealing with every day that are really interesting and part of the conversation when we focus on one continent, like on one production out of a continent. But also we have many artists from Europe, from the US, Caribbean artists as well. So it's a contemporary art collection. And still there is this link with Africa, but it's a very wide link somehow. So and so it began like this, out of curiosity, and then the question is how to actually relate with the different type of works now and try to make sense out of it, so that some topics, some narratives, some imaginaries can be tangible for the public. So now this is the challenge.
That brings me to an article in the newspaper Le Temps, where you talked about the work of the artist Godfrey Donkor from Ghana, entitled Pure Ali 2 from 1999, where we see the figure of Muhammad Ali in front of the photocopy of a book of a reproduced cross-section of a boat used during slave trades. And you said this: from colonial society to contemporary consumer society, we are not replaying a story whose foundations are, however well known, questions. It seems to me that this reversal of gaze is one of the most interesting things that works of art can do on their audience. Can you develop on this and explain this? Because I think it's so important right now.
Right. So the thing is, and it's very strong with this work of Gottfried Donker, but the thing is, since narratives, at least the one we study, it was kind of frustrating beginning to work with this collection because, of course, when you study history of art in Europe, at least in Switzerland and in Germany, because that's where I studied it, you don't really engage with much questions related of outside of Europe, actually. Even though, but that's the privilege, right? You don't have to talk about some of the issues or some of the products of the Western history. And then with this collection, many of the artists would approach their perspective on the world, the way they see globalization, the way they see inequality system, the way actually the gaze is coming back in return on Western issues, and the way there are so many things in the process that have been invisibilized through very specific and very mainstream somehow narratives that we would have when we study history of art or when we study arts in Western countries. So suddenly you're gazing at the works, but they're also gazing at their public back, especially when a collection like this is in Geneva. So how does it operate a change on us as well in the way we suddenly reconsiderate Western history, imperialism, colonialism, of course. And what do we really face in this society that we haven't been able to look at really until now? And this collection talks a lot about this, like many works of the collection talk about this, the way suddenly the artist would raise question about who is writing the history. Why is it always the same type of narrative? Why don't we speak about issues seen actually by people who are facing it, living it, and so on? And I think it has an important role to play being in Europe as well. I think it's important that actually there is just more inclusivity in collections in general. But since we speak about this specific African art and of the diaspora collection, probably, the reversal of the gaze, the way there's suddenly also a new way to question ourselves is really something that is important in the conversation. And we're not educated towards this in Switzerland either.
No.
I mean, there is this really strong and really wrong thought about not having participated in any colonial projects and so on, even though it's obviously not true. And many researchers, many artists are talking about this more and more.
How does the foundation contribute to the development of contemporary African and diaspora art, especially for women artists?
So as you know, the foundation doesn't have like a museum for its collection for now, but still there are many different projects that we organize with partner institutions. And so the idea is to be able to make collaborations to show the collections and so on. We worked on an exhibition which is called Inside Out. It's the idea of a movement, right, between the inside and the outside. It's also the idea of the reversal somehow. The thing was we wanted to gather together an ensemble of artworks that would show the multiplicity in the collection, because there is no like real unicity. Many different artists, many different practices, many different interests. So the idea was to gather a group of artworks, which in this case have a few things in common, because many of the figures that are depicted, it's exclusively figurative painting and sculptures in this case. And many of these artworks would have figures that are hidden or covered with veil, with masks, with all sorts of items. And to take this opportunity of having this little visual in common to show the multiplicity, but also to approach with a few critical points, the question of identities. And I'm saying issues in terms of questions, like the questions it raised. I can speak about one of the work. There is a work of Tessa Mars, who is an Haitian artist who mainly works with her own body in her paintings, and who would transform herself and include her story in the narrative of the Haitian Revolution, so to say it. Not many women were included regarding, like, there is a lack of the way we document and the way we tell this type of narratives.
Yeah.
She'd say, okay, so what I'm gonna do is that I'm gonna fictionalize the thing, include myself as being a revolutionary, and wear some of the attributes of a culture I feel related to, and actually rewrite a story where I'm part of the conversation. We have much more artists who are men in the collection for now, but more and more, I think, there's also more and more galleries having kind of a 50-50 representation for artists. So this makes also the thing easier, I must say, because once again, when it's not done from the very start, like even if you think just on how you build a collection and what you're looking out, the type of galleries you're following and the type of people you're in contact with, if this work hasn't been done yet, it doesn't mean, once again, that women do not exist or are not creating. It just means that it's going to take a lot more time to actually make the work to research and make the work of having a speech around this work and so on. So this is where we're going, I mean, Mm-hmm.
Last summer, Pro Helvetia, the Swiss Arts Council, commissioned you to create the conception and presentation of a series of panel discussion on photography in Les Rencontres d'Arles. Could you talk about and assess your experience there?
What I really wanted to experience and the people I wanted to invite, it was also related to trying to have as much possible different voices in the conversation. So for the first panel conversation, I guess we were with Sabine Weiss, who is now a super recognized photographer who had kind of a retrospective during Arles and so on, along with very young and very talented photographer Leobang Thlako, and a woman from a slightly older generation, but still a very young photographer, Simchi. It was really interesting to have three women of three different generations talking about their practice as photographers and as artists, and of the way they were engaging with their environment. Sabine Weiss was probably many times in her career the only woman photographer wherever she was going. Still, she doesn't really want to engage this way with her practice and her career, and I also get that and I respect that. But she would say it wasn't easy, but still she made her path. And on the other hand, Leobang, it was probably one of the first shows she could exhibit in France in this case, and it was part to a special prize of the Rencontres d'Arles. And she probably was also a first encounter with this type of audience that is like used also to come to the festival and so on. And at the same time, she had a really free way to envisage her relation with photography, and she was very much somehow like Sabine Weiss, also very much related to commercial works, very much like engaged within her community. It was very interesting to have her as representing this younger generation of creators who have like no boundaries really, I guess. I don't know. She incarnated that to me. And Simchi, she's someone who has a strong theoretical background also. So she was dealing a lot with making tangible probably some of the colonial aspects or anti-colonial aspects she approaches in her work. So anyhow, the conversation did not really happen because this also were three women. I mean, we were having a nice chat and they were answering my questions and so on. But at some point, it was also maybe they were evolving in such different ways and with such different methods that it wasn't really like so easy to make a conversation happen as when people would work on the same thing. So it was also an interesting experience in this sense, is that having a diversity of practices and of visions and so on doesn't necessarily make people encounter each other, because sometimes it's also part of the you would respect what your neighbor is doing, but still you don't relate really to it. So it was really an experience in this sense. And I'm glad Pro Helvetia is also quite open to have this type of convergences. Yeah, because it was really something, I must say.
Were you able to feel some kind of a trend of where photography is going? Or where these women that work in photography, these women photographers are going with their work? Is there some kind of a movement right now? Could you feel that or not so much?
I think the consciousness we were mentioning before as a result is kind of reshaping at least or orienting somehow the type of work, not even really work, but probably the method the artist would be using, like this sensitivity and the questions that are more and more raised in the public sphere, but in museums then and institutions and so on, have this really positive effect, I guess, of making emerge some questions that wouldn't be really discussed otherwise, kind of. I would say. Yeah. I hope we can still talk about pretty much everything, just like putting the care and attention and education it's necessary to have when you want to approach sometimes difficult topic, as long as people educate themselves and have like gathered the necessary information. I think, the conversation can be quite open, right?
Yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm. Do you have any tips for young women artists and professionals in the arts to fight against inequality and to be empowered or feel empowered?
Listen to other women who you think are inspiring, that inspire you. This is something I do, I think, every day now. We have podcasts and everything, so this is great. We can do this. Also, we have to continue to confront ourselves. That's important still, to people who think differently from us.
This podcast is supported by Pro Helvetia, the Swiss Arts Council, the Republic and Canton of Geneva, and the city of Nancy in Switzerland. We are so thankful for their support and commitment to women, culture, and the arts. Thanks for listening to Raw and Radical Women in the Arts podcast. Learn more about our featured artists and sign up for news and updates by visiting our website rawradical.com.
Organic, radical, profound.
Please consider leaving us a comment and review on your preferred podcast listening platform to help others discover the show and take part in this global dialogue.
She, intuitive.
I am Maureen Broadbeck, and until next time, keep the dream alive.
Woman.